you have to look at things in that if you don't master the way to build your business, you're never going to be able to build your business.
Everything you mentioned are doable things. Nothing is, oh, I'm not smart enough, or I'm not this, or I'm not that. Of course, you have to be good at what you do, but everything you mentioned, I mean, I feel like if somebody did everything you just mentioned, they could be pretty good at their business and be very successful. Okay, Team Eagle, you do not want to miss this podcast, this interview that we just did, Andrew Sokol.
You have an opportunity as a viewer for this interview to hear a top-tier consultant that consults behind the scenes of major companies that you see on the news and you never hear about these guys. This is an opportunity to hear what goes on in the thinking and the promoting and the planning behind the scenes of successful companies, listening to successful people. He's one of those guys, and we have him.
Get ready to learn something that can bring your business to the next level. Stay tuned with the Be Better at Business podcast by Eagle in 3, 2, 1, go.
Welcome to Eagle Employer Services Podcast, where it's all about graduating from an employer by accident to an employer on purpose with a purpose.
Hello, everybody. We've got on the phone here Andrew Sokol. Andrew is a consultant to many of the high-up leaders in the sports wagering world. Andrew is one of 2 consultants in the entire country to some of the more common platforms. We'll let him talk about who he works with and how he does it. So anyways, Andrew, first off, do you want to say hi to the audience?
Yeah. Hey, everybody. Glad to be here.
So could you tell us just your career history and where you are now and how you got there?
Yeah. So I started off in traditional banking way back when out of college. I got into a management trainee program. And at the end of that, they wanted to put me in to manage customer service group of about 200 people. And I said no. And then I wanted to get into the marketing side. So I went in and got into the marketing on the bank side. I did that for about 5 years, and I was recruited by Visa and moved up to San Francisco and managed relationships for Visa for companies like Bank of America and Wells Fargo in everything and anything that they were doing with the Visa branded cards. In and about 1995, I was asked to move to Atlanta and manage the Olympic Games for Visa International. It would have been about a 2-year stint there. But at that time,
cool.
My former boss from the bank became the CEO of MasterCard and said, well, if you're moving to Atlanta, why don't you head up our Atlanta office and we'll, beat your salary by X and make you happy and all that kind of stuff. So I did. Lived in Atlanta, managed that office for MasterCard for a period of years. And then I went on to hold executive positions at public company, First Data. I held executive position at American Express. And in 2007, I went to a startup company called Revolution Money. It's still in the banking payment industry. We sold that company to American Express in 2010. And since that time, I've been focused on consulting. And about 4 years ago, I was recruited to consult to both FanDual and Draft Kings, and they are still clients today.
Wow, that is dadgum cool. I did not know that, Andrew. You keep this to yourself.
I made it up.
I'll tell you one of my bigger questions. I think you might have answered it, is because I remember you were like, yeah, I'm kind of looking for work. I'm looking for a gig. And next thing we know, you're a consultant with Draft Kings. And I thought, man, because it seems like anytime you want to do something, you're able to get connected to just top-notch people. And there's a lot of people with skills, and you have extraordinary skills. But a lot of times people can't get in front of the people like you did to hire them. And was it a recruiting firm you used to get in touch with DraftKings, or was there What was the
relationships?
Was it a relationship? Was it using a top tier recruiting firm? How in the world are you able to get in touch with the people that you do?
Well, I think the number one thing to tell people is don't ever burn bridges that you think you're going to need to have going forward. And that could be in a positive way and a negative way. And what I mean by that in a positive way, we all know what a negative way is, but what I mean in a positive way is in the business world, you never know where your next gig is going to come from. And there are a ton of people that I have met over the years, and I've just made it a point to never stop talking to them. And that could be an email, that could be a text. In the earlier days, I would just send a letter or a card or a postcard when I was traveling, just so people never forgot about me. So, if you think about it, your next client or your next job is going to be with somebody that you're probably working with today. Or in fact, if you're employed and you're servicing other companies, if you do a good job, the company that you're servicing might want to hire you. So you always have to put your best foot forward. And I've just always made it a practice to do that. To make a long story short, I was, as you guys well know, I was doing something locally in Denison and kind of having fun with that and semi-retired in what I was doing. And I happened to get a phone call from an attorney who I worked with on several projects, probably 6 years prior to that. And she basically just asked me what I was doing. And I told her I was doing, I was trying to be a rock star owning a recording studio. And she said, well, she had a client that needed some help and needed some expertise in the payment industry. And I was the first one she thought of. Now, this attorney is well known in the payment field. She sits on many committees for the American Bar Association. And one of her clients was Draft Kings. So I told her that, look, I'd be happy to help out. And, depending on what it was. And it ended up being, a consulting position, third party for not only Draft Kings, but for FanDual. That was 4 years ago. And I'm happy to say that they are still clients today, plus our others in the sports wagering world.
Wow, that's a really good story. It's amazing how, and it's always been my attitude as well, but to always keep a door open. And in our business, we every now and then someone leaves for whatever reason, but we always want to leave the door open to welcome them back, to let them know that that we appreciate their business and we'd like to do business with them again. And more times than not, we have so many times over the last 20 years, customers return. And what you're saying is all of those contacts, whether they were ever a client or not, all of those contacts and people you've met, whether it's by happenstance or not, you've made it a point to keep in touch with them and to send them a note and to have a personal relationship.
Well, it's not anything but I think people have to always assess how people perceive you, and that your reputation should really suit your business and your goals. And again, what I mean by that is that if you want to be stagnant and not move forward in your career, then you can do what everybody else is doing because it's mostly a Me Too society. But if you figure out a way how to stand out in the crowd, you do that by being good at what you do. But there's a lot of people that are good at what they do. So how are you going to stand out and be different? You can be better, but someone may be as good. So if you're not constantly, looking at yourself, and even with your employees, right, your leadership style and how your employees perceive you, it's everybody. And it's not that you have to put on a false front, but it really has to be that, your reputation in your business, in your community, at your place of work, really will affect your career and if you're a small business owner, how your team operates. So if you don't check in every now and then to make sure they remember you, or in your own business, if you're meeting the perception that you have to match your internal goals, you fail in a way of making it to the next step. And I only mean that in a way that you don't fail at doing things, but you constantly have to look at that. Otherwise, you're not going to have the respect from your peers, your potential hiring companies, your employees, and things like that, if you're not addressing the things inward.
Well, you're leaving opportunities that you might on the table that you might not ever know about if you missed keeping up with or making contact or working hard to improve yourself on every job that you do, and then projecting that in a way that's positive and not self-promoting. And when you're doing a good job and you're improving yourself, you don't have to be self-promoting. You're doing the job that everyone's going to see.
You can sincerely reach out to people and connect with people. You probably for years, like sending postcards to people when you go in places, you're not soliciting anything. You're just keeping in touch. Anyone would interpret that to just be like, wow, that's kind.
Right. You guys know my sense of humor. I mean, my joke was, for many people, was I would always, be in touch with them. And if I was somewhere, I would buy them a snow dome. And those little silly things that you find at gift shops, right, where you shake it and the snow comes down. And I would always ask them to buy me one. And I've got a box full of snow domes from people. And it's just,
that's pretty funny.
It's not always, it's just, you kind of have to lighten things up a little bit. You don't want to waste anybody's time.
I never got a snow dome from you.
Yeah. But you're not always selling something. You're just being a true person and checking in.
Would you say, so not everyone has a unique sense of humor, but man, looking at you, who wouldn't want to reach out to you knowing your sense of humor? You find some way to connect with everybody, some way to get a laugh. Dad and I have experienced it firsthand. It's just natural to you. It's part of who you are. Pretty amazing.
But you know what the biggest problem with that is, Mike?
What?
Is that I've never received a snow dome from you or Linwood.
But see, now all of a sudden, every time I see one, I'm going to think of you.
Don't think of me, just buy it.
Well, there's going to be one come along that'll fit perfectly.
Right.
I've always been amazed listening to different podcasts or really very accomplished people. And when you ask them how it is they got to where they are, what are some of the biggest reasons how they did it, you expect some, crazy elaborate answer that they could never do. But it seems like more often than not, it always boils down to something simple, like just something that you would almost forget about, like, oh, of course, relationships, keeping in touch. People almost expect a bigger or better answer out of you when you've reached a certain level of success. But man, it always seems to boil down to some of the principles, just the basic principles.
Well, and it really has to do with that you constantly have to make sure that you're doing the right things. And it's pretty straightforward, right? If you're a small business owner, the things that you should be doing to improve. Because a lot of people just kind of, unfortunately, will go in and say, look, I'm going to open up my own business and then wait for things to happen. It doesn't work that way. They don't know how to manage the finances. They don't understand what cash flow is. They don't know how to set goals. They don't know how to increase traffic, whether it's a website or coming in the door to the stores. They don't know how to do marketing. They think if you post something on Facebook that people are all of a sudden going to buy things from you. A lot of people
that doesn't work.
Will go into a presentation and not know what they're talking about and turn around and read the presentation. I mean, you have to look at things in that if you don't master the way to build your business, you're never going to be able to build your business. And nobody wants
But
to
everything,
see you. Go on.
everything you mentioned are doable things. Nothing is, oh, I'm not smart enough, or I'm not this, or I'm not that. Of course, you have to be good at what you do, but everything you mentioned, I mean, I feel like if somebody did everything you just mentioned, they could be pretty good at their business and be very successful.
Well, and here's the secret sauce in today's world. Everything I mentioned and more is available in video tutorials on YouTube. Everything.
Yeah.
I mean, there's for a business to fail, there's a lot of reasons why business fails, right? And it's not always the owner. It's not always it could be the wrong product at the wrong time. I mean, a lot of things happen. But the problem is that if you go back and look at small businesses and you look at things, and not everybody's an entrepreneur, but everybody can be. But it takes time. It's a different mindset. And when you realize that you're not going to get a paycheck unless you work hard. But oh, by the way, if you think you're working hard, there's a difference between working hard and working smart. And if you don't figure out how to work smart, then your chances of being successful are diminished.
Well, and you can't work if there's no business. I mean, you want to work, right? There's people that want to work, and then they can't find, well, what is that? How does that? You can learn. You have to learn how to create the business and get the business in so you can work.
But in all honesty, and I'll use experience that I've had that you guys know well about, is that people will say that they're working and there's no business. So there's really a difference is what are you working at and what are you doing? And it all comes down to setting goals. You know, what I've always said, and I say this to clients, is that if you can't measure the results, you can't manage anything. You have no idea what's happening.
So
and it's
true.
The same in reverse. If you can't manage it, you can't measure it. So if you don't know what your goals are, how do you know if you're succeeding or not?
What was that book you and I talked about where, I mean, it's a world-renowned book, but it's about measuring, modifying, and then adjusting the results. And it's basically what you just said. Forgot the name of it.
Yeah, I can't. There's books. It's kind of like change management in a way. If you Google measuring, modifying, things like that, businesses, you'll find a ton of books.
I've noticed, I know a lot of some of the trends we're seeing is people will look at, they'll find certain advertisements, and man, everybody right now can advertise on Facebook, on Instagram, on all this stuff. And if you can do a test and figure something out, put an ad out there, and if you say, okay, I've reached this many people with this message, and if you're able to measure it, you're able to look at it and say, okay, I spent $1,000 and made, whatever in return. And if it was positive, you could say, then all of a sudden with more confidence, you can say, well, let's increase the budget, let's tweak it, let's this, let's that. And there's a lot of people right now on social media doing really well with budgets that you'd have never thought people would spend. And without forecasting, without testing, without measuring, Dad and I know a guy that spends, how much is it?
$80,000 a month.
$80,000 a month on social media, and I think particularly Instagram, and he particularly likes Instagram. But you don't do that without precise measurement. What's the return on investment? You don't blindly go, well, I'll throw money at this. So, the people we see on that are using, that's a trend right now. People we see using social media as advertising, you have to measure that. That way if you want to succeed, because otherwise you could be just throwing money down the drain and you don't know what works and what doesn't.
Well, and that happens 99% of the time these days. Is people
let's see what it does.
Right. They'll buy ads. They don't know how to read the results, like you're saying. They don't know how to measure it. They don't even know where to go on Facebook to kind of measure the type of people. And even when they buy a Facebook ad, they're not targeting those ads because they don't know how.
Right.
So, if you're not doing target marketing, Or for an example, I was on the road the other day and I saw a billboard, and it was pretty much an odd spot to have a billboard, but it was for a business that's probably 10 miles away in an area that no one ever goes to. And I'm thinking to myself, somebody really sold them, a can of worms or, a bridge in Brooklyn or something to be able to put a billboard up there, because they're not cheap and they'll never see their return on it ever. And I just, it's just, I think people have to know their limitations, right? You become an entrepreneur and think you can do everything. But the problem is, you're an expert at, you guys are smart and intelligent, and I know, Mike, you study on things, but, you're a specialist in what you do. Before you guys invested in marketing and advertising, I know you studied on it. And I know you looked at a bunch of different ways to do things. And in fact, I'm pretty sure before you invested in doing these podcasts, you went and did some research on it to make sure that it will provide a good return. I know you're providing a service to your clients and future clients, or maybe anybody that wants to listen. But at the end of the day, time is money, and money for marketing is money. And the effort, in a way, has to show some sort of return. And people don't know how to measure effort versus return. It's not easy to do. And you'll hear people saying, yeah, I worked really hard, but I couldn't make it work. The problem is, did you work smart? And sometimes working smart is getting other people to help you that are experts at what you may not know what to do or how to do it.
Your team, yeah.
That is thus the importance for a good consultant.
Yeah.
Someone who can help you get to that next place, and someone who knows what they're talking about.
Yeah. We talked with Kristen Wynn on our last podcast, and one of the things we kind of bumped into that just rang so true is one thing that can be so important is to have your team talk to each other, because a lot of times, people will either assume too much on their own, and you may have a skill, but you may not be good at the marketing, or you may not be good at this, you may not be good at that. One thing we do here at Eagle is the administrative backroom stuff. Some people may not be good at that. Some people may be great at it. But what you do is you get these people, if you really want to go to the next level, and that's not for everybody, but if you want to grow, you have to get people, consultants in different areas, and then they have to talk to each other. So
right. Well, I think that brings up a good point, right? Is that an entrepreneur needs to work with their team, and what I say is not just over them, right? The worst situation to be is hearing from somebody what you're supposed to do and supposed to do and supposed to do. But the best leaders really work alongside you and try to understand what your job is. Even if it's not always, They do it periodically. So if you're an entrepreneur, this means, okay, you're the owner of the company, but you need to get your hands dirty. If you have someone doing social media, learn what they do and do some social media. If you got a blog, help whoever's doing it and sit by their side and help them produce that content. Answer customer service calls. Speak to customers about, ask hard questions. What do you like about our business? What don't you like? How can we improve on what we do to make you a customer for the long term? You have to understand the people that work for you, but you have to understand your customers. And if you do a service and you send them a bill and you don't ask questions, then you're doing the future of your little business a disservice.
The hard questions, what can we do better? I would imagine, man, I'm thinking in my mind, man, I'm scared to know that answer. How easy, and yet Dad and I do it. But man, it would be so easy to just say, I don't want to know. I could just imagine that one just goes completely forgotten about.
Probably. Well, no one likes their weaknesses pointed out, but you need to have your weaknesses. You need to know what your weakness is in your business so that you can get rid of it.
Strong people can take it. Strong people can take criticism. What do I need to work on? That's been my experiences. But saying it and doing it can be two different things.
Well, right. But the problem is that if you don't do it, you've got a better chance
or damned
of
either
failure.
way.
Right. I mean, it's just it's just the way it is. Is that if you're not always working to improve it, and look, my clients are constantly looking at ways to improve the service that they give to customers and being the leaders in their industry. So when a new state opens up to offer sports wagering, neither any of them, they want to be the first one out there. They know that being the first in a market is going to give them the leg up on the competition. So they are furiously working to be able to go into a new market, which in the U.S. is a new state. And it doesn't happen like that because there's rules and regulations that they have to follow. They have to get licensed, but it's a mad scramble. But at the end of the day, it's still going to be that, they're working hard to improve their services. And by the way, they're not forgetting the other customers in the other states. Yeah. So it's a what I'll call a concentric circle of things that have to happen.
What you're saying is there's the customer in front of you, and then there's the customer on the phone. Which one do you take care of first?
Well, right. And then there's customers that you lost or didn't get. And I have always made it a practice to do two things. If I lost the deal, I'd wait a month and I'd do what's called a post-mortem. And I'd reach out to the company to whom I lost the deal, not the competitor, but the company itself. And I'd ask them if they had a half hour to talk to me about what I could do or what my company can do to improve ourselves for the next time. Nobody does that.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, you have to put your tail between your legs and ask the hard questions sometime. But the funniest thing is that, small businesses don't know. I don't think they have an accurate idea of their cash flow. And the problem of that is that if you don't know it and you can't keep up with the financial aspect of what you're doing, that's going to impact you today, tomorrow, and later on. And what I mean by that, if you're not keeping accurate records and you don't know what's happening, you're going to find yourself in a horrendous tax position. Because as an entrepreneur and self-employed, there's self-employment taxes you have to pay that you weren't paying before. And if you don't know that and just start a business, guess what? The IRS doesn't have much pity on people. They expect you to study up and know these things and not say, well, I didn't know I had to pay these things. And if you don't know where you are on a regular basis, you never know how successful you're being.
There's a little bit of a learning curve, but there's technologies out there where you can get a financial snapshot of your company picture. What are my expenses? What are my projected expenses? What's my revenue? Am I going to owe on taxes or what's the deal? How much? And man, a lot of these are able to be done by business owners themselves, or if they don't want to, you can find freelancers that'll help you with it, get it set up for like extremely reasonable. So I mean, it's getting easier and easier. I think in the past it would have cost more, but it's doable. It's not a far-fetched idea.
Again, every aspect of owning your own business, there is a tutorial on YouTube for it.
That's my problem is I'll just be like, well, before I spend, and I'll think, man, this is pretty reasonable. But like, man, is it that reasonable? Let me look it up on YouTube. And next thing I know, I'm like, well, let me try it. And if I get stuck, then I'll hire someone. And man, more often than not, I've learned something new and I can do it. And Linwood and I probably should hire more stuff out, but more often than not, I'm like, yeah, it's not worth it. I can do that.
But that's okay. And I think doing it yourself in the business, you're a small business, and doing it that way, you completely understand all the aspects of your business. And I'd recommend entrepreneurs do that. At a point, you may get big enough that you have to outsource it. But at the end of the day, what you're talking about is just being educated.
When you're educated, I've noticed when people are bidding the project, if you know as much as you can about what they're doing, somehow their price seems to come down versus someone that's like, I don't know what any of this is. How much would you charge to do it for me? The price goes up. Where if they realize they're talking to somebody with some knowledge, for whatever reason, price comes down.
Well, and I think to the point, if you're making a bid, to a customer, and you don't do any research on the customer that you can talk about their business when you're making that bid or proposal, then you're going to fail. You have to know the customer. And if you don't know, the structure, the ownership, or, most of the companies I deal with are big enough, I can find the information about them online, or they're public companies. And I can go and look at their tax returns, right? Because they're publicly, or their annual reports.
Yeah.
You respond to a request for a proposal and you put in key terms from their annual report. They know that you're really interested in their business because you're doing your homework.
Yeah.
The other thing is, for a small business, again, there is what we call small business development centers that's run by the Small Business Association, the U.S. Small Business Association. They provide free services to help you start a business and help point you in a direction to do these kind of things. And that's a Google away. So
yeah, that's one thing Dad and I have never dived into, and we know it's out there, and we know there's grants and there's resources and this and that. We've always kind of had the attitude of we'll figure it out ourselves, but we've just seen it too many times. People that know what's out there, know what resources are available. You'll hear about, they got a grant, or they did this, they did that. I don't know if you actually did something with the city of Denison when you were doing your media company here. Dad and I were here on Main Street in business before you, thinking, what is that? Is that available?
Right.
But
we did get a grant, got a grant of about $50,000
wow.
from the city of Denison. That grant, the way it worked is that, we had to put the money up front. We bought new equipment for a recording studio. And the deal was, in the form of a grant, that every time we did a session, had an artist in, and it could be if we had an artist come in for 2 hours on a Tuesday and another one came in later that day, it was based on a session. And for every session that we did, the city gave us the money back in the form of a grant. And the whole idea was that it came from the Economic Development Corporation, that we were going to bring people into the city of Denison, which we did, and they were going to spend money there. Or we were going to spend more money, right? So if they were there for a day or a couple hours, we'd take them to lunch at the local coffee shop. We'd go spend commerce to help, the city grow. And if they were there for a couple of days or 3 days, we'd rent a hotel from a local hotel. They'd go out to eat locally, and they'd spend money. So there
locally.
are grants out
Yeah.
there.
And these people you were having out were influencers. These were musicians. These were people with a center of influence, where they're the cool people that you could bring others indirectly. The city of Denison sees the one person, but there's probably a residual of their center of influence. Like, oh, so-and-so was up at Denison. All of a sudden they know who Denison, the city of Denison is, and when previously they didn't.
We had people coming in from out of town, and, they would post, and we would make sure that we posted and asked them to post, and did live videos and things of them being here. We had people from, as far away as Boston, come record and things like that. And look, it may not be the right thing for everybody, but, it may not even be a grant, but there's always help available. And I know I've mentioned this several times, and I don't want to keep repeating myself ad nauseum, but, Google how to manage your books, and you'll find people that will give you free tutorials how to do it. And believe it or not, most people don't know how to manage their books, because it's not like balancing a checkbook.
If you were, say, looking at the average typical business owner, where they're relying on the business that walks in the door, maybe little to no marketing, little to no financial outlook or projecting or measuring. I take it from our conversation thus far that your advice would be find some way to measure and improve and budget and relationships, keeping in touch, maintaining a wider circle of influence, which is real easy to maintain. Anyone can have a small circle of influence, but to do what you do and maintaining a wider circle of influence. Would those be the top things? And if there's more, what might you recommend as some of the more important things a business owner could do to push them to the next level?
Well, I think the secret is, and it's not easy, but is find a way to stand out in a crowd. If you're a donut shop owner, guess what? There's 20 other donut shops. So what's going to make yours better? Is it your donut shop is cleaner? Is it that your donut shop has the best donuts? Do you have the best deal? Are you the best customer service there? Do you remember clients' names? If you're serving the same thing that everyone else is serving, why are you different and why would they come there?
We read a book in college, and this may be real old information, Purple Cow, and they documented this. I think it was a barbecue joint. It was 10 years ago I read it, and it was Purple Cow, and I think that was the name of their restaurant. And one of the more different things is they had a big purple cow up front, and they were different. I don't know that they reinvented the wheel as far as barbecue goes, but when you went, they stood out in your mind when you went to their barbecue joint. It's nice if you're different in a way that sincerely helps people, but sometimes just being different is good enough.
Well, look, I mean, I don't know if you guys know this, and maybe you do or forgot. I didn't say it. I taught business and advertising at the college level. And one of the first things I had my students do on their own self and what they wanted to do and how they were is to do what we call a SWOT analysis. And that's SWOT. You can Google it. And that's, what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What are your threats? And what are the opportunities? And if you were to sit there and list those as a small business and be honest with yourself, what are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What are my threats? If I'm a donut shop, my threats are the other 19 donuts shops, right? And what are my opportunities? And if you're real honest and true with yourself to do it, you're really starting a strategic planning that can really help you identify, where you are in your business, if it's doing well, what it needs to improve, where it needs to grow, and what could be its undoing or failure. And there's a bunch
I forgot
of
all
things,
about that.
right? But it's really a simple thing. And you know what? Companies and entrepreneurs should do it every year. I think the problem is that, you ask these questions, which are great questions about, what can someone do? And to me is learn. Is that you may be good at making that donut, but do you know how to sell them? And that's the problem.
What's the problem, and it's also the solution. So I look at people that never stop learning. I mean, there's people that have an appetite, and and they never stop learning because the world never stops changing. And in business, it never stays the same. And you always have to be prepared to adjust. And you always have to be prepared for what you don't necessarily expect. And how do you prepare for what you don't expect or don't know? And those are things that if you did everything else the way you're describing it, you knew the answers to these things, then when something comes up you weren't expecting, you're better prepared to make a good decision.
All I know is, man, we touched on a few things, but I know we're going to have you back on because there is so much more we have to learn from you, and there's so much more you have to offer. I'm like, we could take this for another 2 hours, but enough's enough. We'll stop it here. But man, I'm just, after this podcast, I'm already waiting for the next one because we kind of got a free tutorial from you. We need to have you out.
It's not free. Trust me.
You'll send us an
Nothing
invoice.
is free. Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate
All right,
it.
you're welcome. Talk to you guys.
All right. Bye.
Everybody, that's the end of our podcast. You can count on us having Andrew back on this podcast, because when it was done, Dad and I were looking at each other saying, we need to have him back because we didn't get enough. There's more to learn from Andrew, and guess what? There's going to be more to learn from the Be Better at Business podcast. So stay tuned, subscribe, like, comment, all of that. And in the meantime, be better at business.
With Eagle Employer Services.
That's pretty good.
That's good. I like that one.